Hello and welcome back, everyone, to Spiritual Talk TV. Thank you for joining us. We have another fantastic guest this evening. We have the lovely Sara Ruble. Good evening and welcome, Sara.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Sara, so before we go straight into why you're here tonight, can you tell us a little bit about your backstory and your life, please?
Sure. I'm from Ohio, so I'm an American. I've lived here my entire life, and my journey really through all of my spiritual learning and growing really started in 1994 when my only child passed suddenly of seizure and strep throat and a variety of different things when he was 1,000 miles away from home. So it was stunning. I had no idea what life would provide me at that point. It was clearly kind of out of my mind. And it started a journey for me that I could never have anticipated. And unlikely for me to have even known, I knew nothing about spirituality. I wasn't very religious. So I just basically had what I had in front of me. But incredibly, Scott is my son. Scott sent me a message the day after his funeral, his celebration of life. That was just the most unlikely thing that it could have ever happened. And I'd like to share that with you to kind of give you an opening into, how I was brought into a spiritual relationship with him and then into the soul planning.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is why we've invited Sara on. She has a really unique story. You lost your son, your only child, but your journey has been so incredible in terms of what come next. Can you share that with us, please?
Yes, the spiritual journey was never on my horizon. I had no interest really in looking into that. I was not someone who, I just took kind of life day to day and tried to be a good person and had, a wonderful child, my only child, and took those steps into spirituality, kind of forced into it when my son passed. Very unexpectedly, my only child.
Yeah, and he was 19. He was about to start the journey of his whole life. And to have, I can't imagine what you've been through. So what were the next steps after that for you?
Well, we had Scott was 1,000 miles away from home when he passed. He was working in a national park for the summer. He was a college student, and he was an environmentalist, and he wanted to be out in the wild and experience that. So he was only there for 4 days when actually he called me one evening. We had no cell phones even at that time. And he called me and said, "Mom, I'm so sick. I wish you were here," which was like, we just got you out there for 1,000 miles away. And now you're, but I just listened so carefully. And I knew he was sick, and there were adults working in the park with him. No other students had come to work for the summer. And so Scott was alone in a 10-room dorm. And he called and told me how sick he was. And I knew he had a doctor's appointment the next day, but I was frightened out of my mind.
Yeah. So, I can't imagine the grief. Obviously, hearing the news of your son passing 1,000 miles away, it was terrible. So once you found out, what happened with the message itself from Scott? What did you hear?
So the day after his calling hours, services and all, I was just beside myself. I'd cried all night. But I suddenly got this thought in my mind, and now I know where that came from, to get up, and I wanted to write a letter to our community for our local newspaper to thank everyone. 500 people came to the calling hours for Scott. It was just incredible. So I went to we have notebook paper here in America. I'm sure you probably do too, in a cellophane wrapped container. And I went to find Scott's notebook paper, which was still at home, even though he was in college. And I pulled out a piece of paper, but actually 2 pieces came out. And one of the pieces was a regular piece of paper. The other was a poem that I could show you, but I would rather almost read it if that would be okay.
Yes,
and this poem was actually in the notebook paper.
Thank you.
Yeah, the notebook paper package. So I'll read that.
Yes, please.
And it says, "Children are like kites. You spend a lifetime trying to get them off the ground. You run with them until they're both breathless. They crash. You add a longer tail. They hit the rooftop. You pluck them out of the spout. You patch and comfort, adjust and teach. You watch them lifted by the wind and assure them that someday they'll fly. Finally, you keep letting it out, and with each twist of the ball of twine, there is a sadness that goes with the joy, because the kite becomes more distant, and somehow you know that it won't be long before that beautiful creature will snap the lifeline that bound you together and soar, as it was meant to soar, free and alone. And I was so taken by the word soar, which is not a typical word in my vocabulary.
Yeah.
But I just have to show you this on the screen, because at the bottom of this picture are 3 kites that are drawn that spell May, and Scott passed on May 20th.
Oh, my word.
So it was so clearly a sign from Scott, when I knew that I didn't even know that signs were a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've gone on from the loss of your son, and you've done so much to help other people. You're an inspiration. Can you tell us a little bit about that work and what you did, and where you're at now with that as well?
Sure. Well, I started out 3 years after Scott passed. I started a parents group locally in my hometown here, and did that for 7 years. So I was connecting with other parents. Still not a real spiritual person, but connecting on the grief and the love and how we could get through this together as a community and each individually. And at some point, 6 years into my journey, I heard some words go through my mind that said, build the children's memorial. And it's like, okay, I'd never had anything like that happen. It did not sound like Scott. I didn't expect to hear from Scott, because back then we still didn't know we could hear from our children in those ways.
Yeah.
So I ignored those words. But 3 weeks later, I was sitting at a red light in my car, and the same words came across in my mind again: build the children's memorial. I was so shocked, and it's like, is that Scott talking to me to build a children's memorial? And I already had a parents group that I was working with, and so 10 of those moms and dads joined me. And within 7 months, we'd raised $50,000 through the community and all. And we built a children's memorial here in my hometown. That now, after all this time, 30 years, we have, not 30 years, 20 years, we have 800 memorial bricks for children. And that whole memorial was built on those words: build the children's memorial, that Scott brought me.
Yeah.
That was my opening to, there's so much more to this journey spiritually than I could have imagined.
Yeah.
And then the next step, I have to tell you, was in 2007, Robert Schwartz's book, Your Soul's Plan, came out. And I read it. I found out about it. I read it, and I underlined practically every line that was in that book.
Really?
I was so, it just came into my heart and my soul in a way that it was like, this was so much more than I could have imagined, with Scott leaving his body and yet coming back and showing me in different ways that he was here. But Robert just illustrated it for me in a way through that book. And I found out he lived an hour from us, so I had to meet him.
Oh, really? Okay. So your understanding on soul planning, can you tell the audience, people that are watching at home, what do you mean by soul planning?
Soul planning, as I learned from Robert Schwartz, but also through Scott now as my teacher. Soul planning meaning that we plan our lives before we are born. Like, every detail is what I get. And that there's so much that as humans that we don't like to have happen to us. We don't like pain. We don't like fear. We don't want all of that, but we plan those kinds of experiences because that's where the greatest growth is.
Yeah.
We ignore those. We want to fight those things, but that is really where the growth is for our soul. So when we think of ourselves as human beings, I now see myself as a spirit in a human body with a soul that is working on a journey throughout my lifetime now to grow and reach out now, as I've been shown to do, in ways that I never even imagined. And that's my soul plan, has been, now I know I'm following my soul plan. I had been earlier, but unaware.
Oh, so many questions off of that, Sara, on soul planning. And I know it's quite a new phenomenon for for people, that soul planning, and it's been coming up quite a lot across social media platforms. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because one of the things that inspires me is to try to live to the best of my ability, because I'm very much aware that I have a plan, that I've come here, I've incarnated to here, but how do I find what my highest good is, or my highest plan is to achieve what I'm supposed to be achieving, if that makes sense?
Well, I think that you almost have to look at what has come into your life thus far. Do you have passions? Is there something that has been driving you? Have you found a community of people that you connect with in ways? Is there a passion, literally a passion that you have? For me, none of this that I was ever doing before Scott passed was a passion. I wasn't even aware of it. And so I would say for anybody is to look at that, but then it almost takes time to start to see your life evolve and give it even more meaning, and know that the most challenging thing that maybe has ever happened to you might have been the most significant thing to take you on a journey that you never would have gone on otherwise, because we avoid pain, right? We avoid anything that's really hard. And there's so much growth in those moments.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people will be sitting at home thinking, well, what is my passion? But that's a very difficult question to answer on us from a conscious self, because we assume that we are doing the right thing, but sometimes trauma comes along, it knocks us into a place. For example, what happened to you? Do you still get messages from Scott telling you or giving you advice and just synchronicities?
He's a constant voice in my head. And even when he isn't, I know that he's guiding me. And so if like today I was preparing for this, but then it's like, we've got this, Mom. We will help you. We will help Paul. Just trust this in a way that I always think I have to be ready and I have to have all my ducks in a row. And I've learned to really trust my journey now. And I tell people, learn to trust your journey. That's the path you're on. Even, the unknowns.
Well, I do thank him for the help, because we had a couple of fluffs on the introduction, so it was quite good fun. So I do thank Spirits for helping us. But it's also such an empowering thing to know. And so I guess my next question is about the grief process within itself. Do you feel that the grief process, I don't think, I'm a working medium, and I don't think that mediums understand enough about the grief process, unless, of course, you live it yourself. Do you feel there should be more responsibility for that?
That is so interesting. I mean, I agree. And I've had medium readings myself. And of course, not always 100% of everything that comes out resonates with me. And that's what I'm looking for, is what resonates with me. But on the other hand, I take all of it into consideration, because maybe there's something beyond that I'm going to, look into, or is going to come to me that I don't know yet. And so I understand that. But there are mediums I see now in America, and Kat Bailey is a perfect example of someone who had experienced, life in different ways, but she was brought that. And so I don't know that any of us are able to really facilitate that unless you're meant to be a medium. If that's something that you're doing, it's a passion, you connect with others in that way, then for sure you're being shown by Spirit that is your path. And I guess because, I told you in my early life, I was, as I'd written to you, I was a 5th grade teacher. And actually I've been teaching practically my entire life, even though I had kind of left the teaching field and come back. But now I feel that I've continued to do that in lots of ways. But, as a medium now, that part has come in a way that I think it really can help a lot of, I'm not a certified medium, but being able to utilize that information that I receive has been very helpful. And so I understand, as a medium, that's kind of a challenge.
See, I personally,
to not always know.
Sorry, Sara. We got a little bit of a delay over the Atlantic. I think someone's playing with the cable under the sea. I'm not sure, but I do apologize for that. It's really interesting, because I think the mediumship is a natural process, and I think do you think actually people being more open-minded, and I'm not saying people should be, but to help loss and grief, to help inspire people, do you think it should be more widely available to those in grief, especially those that have just, yeah.
I understand that. I think one of the hard parts is that is finding that right fit for
Yeah.
us. Is like, we could have a reading and so it helped someone else, but maybe this wasn't the right medium for us. And I think also that one of the hard parts is that the cost sometimes for what we consider a really good medium or someone we've heard of can be really high. And that also can be a challenge for the average, person to be able to handle. So I think that, the whole field is something that, I'm not that well versed in it, but to know that I see a lot of moms and mostly moms coming out of their grief as mediums, that their children are, I think there's a lot more mediums that are going to be on the earth, from this experience of having actually gone through something that deep, that pain, and then connecting with your loved one, your child.
I agree. There are certainly more enlightened children and more sensitive children being born and growing in this world, and that can only be a good thing to help us to evolve. But we and I, as a medium, I do personally struggle with the cost attachment to that connection to the other side, because I feel as mediums do have a responsibility to maybe try and balance between voluntary and financial. We all have to make a living, we all have to pay the bills, but there has to be a balance where we should be able to do things on a voluntary basis. And the problem is with our industry, it's not regulated as properly as it should be. So that in itself, if it was more regulated, I do think mediumship has a really strong place in helping grieving parents. But is there any other thing advice you could offer from your own personal experience, the journey that obviously losing your only son, which again, I have two children. It was my worst fear. I had sleepless nights. I had a period when I was on my own, bringing my children up on my own. I used to lie awake sometimes in case I heard a noise in the house. I was on red alert all the time. It was my worst fear. So I can't imagine what you've been through. But is there anything that would help parents, or even just, God forbid, that are going through this process now?
Well, from what I see, and I'm a part of this of an organization it's actually kind of worldwide now, helping parents heal. Yeah. And there's 27,000 parents throughout the world that are a part of this organization. And what I'm seeing so much more of now, it's not necessarily a spiritually based organization, but it is very open. And I'm seeing so many more parents see such a difference from when I started the journey nearly 30 years ago, to where parents are now getting so many signs from their children. Yeah. And honestly, that is one of the biggest helps, is just having that connection with your child, an individual child, and, having that connection. Mediums can really tie that together. Yes. And, bring other insights through. But this is such a journey for each of us as a parent to stumble through and find what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And hopefully in that process is find those connections, those people that help us and allow us to feel the grief that we feel, and also the beauty of connecting, with our child, with a medium, or through music, or there's so many ways that Scott connected with me through the years before I even had a reading that have been so significant. And I think they do a lot on their own. And the mediums can also validate so much more and add to our stories, which I find, very helpful.
But do you think a level of honesty from the mediumship world would also be helpful in terms of, and I don't care who's listening to this, because I'll hold my hand up. There is no such thing as 100% mediumship. I do not believe that. And I think that's where the element of truth, especially with people that are in such deep grief, especially when you're dealing with parents that have lost children, which there's no such thing as a level of grief, and there's no competition within that. But I think it's probably one of the, I'm pretty sure we can all agree that losing a child is pretty much up there, the top of the tree. It's probably the worst experience you could have with grief. Losing a grandmother, we know Granny's going to go at some point. We kind of prepare ourselves. It's life. But when you lose a child, to me, that is right up there. So there has to be this level of honesty within the world of mediumship. And I personally believe that two worlds can come together to offer more. But it's how do we then bridge that? How can we make that possible? How can we find good enough mediums that are prepared, one, to work voluntarily as well as financially? Because there has to be a balance, but also to be honest without it looking bad on them. We all have bad days as mediums. We all get up in the morning with a headache, or shouldn't have had that last glass of red wine last night, So it happens. It's real. We're living a real life. It's just that, from that perspective, it'd be an ideal world if we could have that. It really would. How we bridge that, I don't know. Maybe, guys, if you want to comment and share in the comments, let us know, because we'd love to know your input on that at home, guys. We really would, because it's something I'm quite passionate about, and obviously you are too, Sara. So, but yeah, I mean, going forward, it is one of my inspirations to try and do that. But soul planning, I can't help it. I keep coming back to soul planning because I'm so fascinated by soul planning, Sara. And I have heard that we choose our parents. Is that true? Is that
Say
true?
that again.
Have you? Sorry, yeah, because the connection's not so great, so hopefully it'll be okay. I have heard that we choose our parents. Is that true?
Yes.
Is there some truth in that?
Oh, okay. Absolutely. I believe that we choose a lot more than other people believe, is what I get. I feel that there's a lot more planning that we are experiencing, that, we were a part of the planning in ways to have the full life that we needed to have. And so I now live my life looking at everything that comes into my life as meaningful, as purposeful. I might not like it all, but, to know that we plan, and with our parents, I mean, that can be very challenging. If you had a great experience, wonderful. But if you didn't, so then past lives kind of have to come into that as well. It's like, so maybe if your parents were very challenging in this lifetime, maybe you were the challenging parent to them in another lifetime. Yeah. It can be, this can take bigger picture throughout. So it just keeps, going on and on, but it does have meaning in those ways of, I know my husband and I were connected in past lives, and we ended up together in this lifetime. And I had this really interesting story that I just want to share, because we went to the Grand Canyon. Okay, we went to the Grand Canyon about, 12 years ago. And it was exciting. We'd been to Sedona, and then we drove up to the Grand Canyon to see these beautiful red rocks and this huge canyon. So we were getting out of the car and going into our into the parking lot to walk towards. You could see the opening to Grand Canyon, and people are sitting on rocks and that kind of thing and wandering around. My husband literally got out of the car. His name's Jay, and he could not walk any further towards the Grand Canyon. He was like so frightened. I've never seen him that way. And I wasn't teasing him, because he was like scaring me. He was so scared. And he was like, he couldn't go any further closer to the Grand Canyon. Wow. And I didn't know what was going on. So we just kind of took a walk into the gift shop, and we saw that there was an option to fly a helicopter over the Grand Canyon the next day. So we signed up for that and looked around the gift shop, and then we left the Grand Canyon. We never really looked in, which we're both afraid of heights. I understood that, but it wasn't that. So I have to tell you, because he fills in a lot of gaps for me. About 5 years later, he said to me that Jay had taken his own life. My husband had taken his own life by jumping into the Grand Canyon. Oh, and when we drove into the parking lot, I saw such a fear in him. And that just really made sense. And so those little tidbits that we get through as we're a spiritual seeker and looking for answers, how those things can come. And a medium could also bring something like that out. I know that there could be connection like that, perhaps. So it's one of those things, or past life regressions as well, but Scott kind of fills in a lot of blanks for me. And to know that, it was just so, it made this whole big picture so much bigger for me.
Yeah.
You know, why I need to be with Jay in this lifetime, and then the trip to the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. I've had similar experiences with people that have told me similar stories. Indeed, my son lives with me, and I'm told that he was my father in a past life. So if you're listening, Adam, he does talk to me like he's my dad sometimes. He's always telling me to put my stuff in the dishwasher. So I don't know what that's about, but it certainly feels like he's my dad at times, which is I can believe that. Absolutely. But again, I know a lot of people might not necessarily be listening at home and believe that. But when you delve deeply, and when you have the experiences that you've had, Sara, it starts to make sense. It fits together. Do you have any more stories like that Scott has shared with you? Because we'd love to know what you've learned from the other side. And do you have quite a good communication, not just with synchronicities? Is there other stuff that Scott has revealed? Because I know I did some work for somebody else who runs a similar helping parents a group, and their son always comes in with her whenever she's working, whenever the group is around. He's always there helping. It's a beautiful thing to see that even our children are helping us with that connection. Yeah.
Yes, and I feel that they're with us, like, even though they're not always talking to us, I feel that they're very present anyway. I feel that we're so connected to spirit that sometimes I listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth, and it's like, who just said that?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe as a medium, that too. It's like, where did that come from? And yet it's profound typically. And it's one of those things that, I'll give you another example of that communication. Was in 2015. Scott said to me, because I was hearing him a lot, we need to write blogs. It's like, no, I don't know how. Listen, I usually went with whatever he asked, but that was like, no, I don't know how to do that. I don't want to. I don't want to. He goes, we need to. It's like, but I don't know how. He says, we'll show you how. Well, I said, who's going to help me get that online? We'll show you.
Oh,
so
wow.
There I was, like, okay, I guess I'm going to write a blog. So I started writing, and that's what I had sent you. spiritteaches.org is where my blogs are. So the first 80 blogs that we wrote were called Death Teaches. And so there's also deathteaches.com. So Death Teaches, where literally I was writing the words. It was my experience, but the words were being written on the page. And sometimes it's very frustrating because I wasn't following it clearly until I got the feeling of how he was going to be coming through with me and give me line after line after line on these blogs. Yeah. So as we wrote these, it was like, okay, we had 17 of them done, completed. And it's like, okay, I don't know what to do with these. He says, I'll show you. So one day I kept driving up past this one building, and I finally looked at the sign. It was a new business in there. And it said on the sign, it says, Transmit Identity. We build websites. It's like, oh, am I supposed to go in there? So I went in, and I said to the young woman who asked if she could help me, I said, yes, could you help me write a blog? Put a blog online. And she said, sure. What's it called? And I just kind of took a breath and said, Death Teaches. It's like not a typical term that, you want to put out there, but I said, Death Teaches. And she goes, oh, okay. Yeah, let's sit down and talk about this. And then she and her husband both helped me tremendously to get those on. And honestly, those are channeled, and they are so amazing because there might be part of my words. And then Scott takes over, overall spirit takes over. And at some point, Scott says, okay, we're done. We wrote 80 blogs, Death Teaches blogs. He says, okay, we're going to write another one called Spirit Teaches. It's like, okay. And then we wrote, I think 22 of those. And they're all on the spiritteaches.org site. And then we were done with them. Only 22 for that one. But it kind of took us from the very beginning of my journey, all spiritual, but always with the intent of teaching other mothers and fathers and anyone who read it more about our soul journey, about collaboration with our children, about resonating, about being vulnerable, so many aspects of our journey. So there's now all those blogs out there online that I never would have done on my own.
So just so to clarify, just so people listening at home, can you tell us where we can find them? What are the names of
If
the
you
blogs,
just
please?
if you just Google spiritteaches.org, I have a website, and both
Yeah,
of those blogs are on there. And
lovely.
the beautiful part of having them online still, I've kept them up even though we're not writing them. They're still very, easily understood today. And everybody that comes in as a new griever, that gives them a beginning of some place to go to. And then we had comments at the end of each blog that anyone that read it could ask, and then we would answer questions. So a lot of specific things were then answered after each blog with our responses.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Sara,
spiritteaches.org.
we'll certainly get people to check that out. We'll share the link in the bottom on this live. Can I ask you a personal question, Sara? And you can tell me to mind my own business, but does grief get easier?
I think it depends on what your journey is meant to be.
Yeah.
For me, and I've met parents from all over the world and different groups that they're in, and I see some people head towards one group or another. Mine was meant to be a spiritual journey, and so I'm around a lot of spiritual people, and I truly believe that aspect has brought a lot of people a greater peace of mind, and it's completely changed my life in those ways. And so I do feel that we can heal. And actually, this month, May 20th, it will be 30 years since Scott passed. And it just is mind-blowing to me as well, because it was so slow in the beginning. And I was in so much agony because I didn't know much. And to be in this place now, and I've been teaching for, quite a number of years. And I've met so many parents that are just new parents now, especially just getting so much more. But I also know parents that I met 15 years ago that have not moved into that spiritual place and have not found it through their religion or their belief system, and they still struggle. And so I have to almost just say, whatever their soul plan is, whatever our soul plan is, that's the path we will take. And we will have experienced, because I think on our soul plan, I believe on our soul plan, the challenges are built into our everyday, into our entire lifetime, in order for us to grow. I believe I was a medium in past lives. In this life, I'm not being a medium, but I have that in me to be able to share. I don't charge anything. I literally just share.
That's beautiful. Can we just slightly touch on a more difficult subject that again takes some, just going to come right out of it, suicide. Do you have any feelings around suicide when people take their life and soul planning?
What I've been taught, and what I believe as well now, is that suicide is another way of someone leaving their body.
Yeah.
It's like somebody taking fentanyl, or it's like Scott dying by natural causes. But how I believe now, that however we leave our body, that was always the intentional way we were meant to go. What happens is then, and I've seen this with other parents, whatever that cause might have been, parents often go into that world and help other parents, or teach about it, or talk about their child openly with the suicide in a way that they're now the teachers, and show us that they have survived, or they're coping, or what they've learned. And so if you can put purpose and meaning in everything, and so I know that suicide is like top number one. And also the drugs as well, because it looks like kind of a free will thing. But I look at everything as soul planned. And I know a lot of parents now whose children have died by suicide, and they are finding ways to, find peace with that. And their children, if their child comes back and connects with them, that helps tremendously as well.
Yeah.
That's an unknown until it happens, though.
It's such a difficult topic, and it requires a certain element of sensitivity. But that has a healing process within that, as you said, and again, it's about parents finding that space that helps them. And I lost my father, I lost a close friend, for me. And actually, I think it was 1998. I lost a best friend, and it seems such a long time ago, but its pain still sits there. But for me, it's more about learning to, and I'm a medium, and I've heard from him. So, and I feel blessed, that I have this, but that pain still sits there for me. And I do.
There's a missing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, my future was changed the minute that Scott left his body, right? No children, no grandchildren. There's and it's one of those things that you always, I didn't have a child, so I would have grandchildren necessarily. I wanted, and I only had the one. And so my whole life has been now, my future, whatever I thought it was going to be, was completely changed 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, in a way that I have come to accept and to trust that spiritually, this was it. This was where I was meant to go and who I would become. And it is a journey. It's a hard journey.
You've done so much though to help those parents in that position. And I just want to touch on this subject as well. And I was doing a live broadcast last night with a well-known medium, an international medium, and we were talking a little bit about soul planning. And a lady came on and said that her daughter was murdered, and he then went on to continue to murder. He murdered a child. He murdered an adult daughter. And to me, when it comes to soul planning, why would we choose to do that? It just goes beyond. I struggle to go there with soul planning, and that's where I struggle with some of the real dark things as humanity can go to. How do we plan that? Do you feel that we ended up there, or was that the murderer? Did he come to Earth to murder? Because I always believe, you see a baby, and it doesn't matter. Whenever a baby's born, you can feel the love coming through. There's just such a pure innocence. How does that child turn into something quite dark like that? It's so difficult.
Wow, I know. I understand your question perfectly, because I've thought of that myself. The explanation that I've been given is, when you look back in history, there has always been pain and death and murder. And, we think of the settlers in the United States coming across the whole country and killing, murdering all the Native American Indians. And that's horrific. You can't even imagine that. But there is a lot that we've always lived with in life. Now we're more aware. We've got, tools to stop, a lot of these things that can happen, but we can't, because if the human comes in, is what I'm given, and their journey is one of balancing something that they've done before, or creating something that they need to in this lifetime. So the murderer comes in and he or she creates something for a family, friends, we don't know how many people are impacted by that one murder. And that person then, most likely, if they're caught, will end up in prison and pay the price for that. But they will have lived this lifetime in a prison, or, hiding from the law in any way. So that's the murderer. It's not going to be easy. The family then has all new lifetime experiences now to start to go through. And how they do that, I again feel is soul planned. I feel that we learn so much from tragedy, and we learn so much to avoid, when we're trying to avoid pain, but we can't totally. And when it comes, it's here. And yes, we look at God's spirit as all loving. I'm not saying it's not loving, but the human experience is a human experience. It's one of the ups and downs, the pain, the death, the birth, and so it's vast. I can't answer all those questions for sure, but there's a lot of balancing going on when someone comes in and does something, and then what the family does, or spouse or whatever. And I think that it's all kind of wrapped up in a bigger picture than we can really see. Yeah. And if Scott would have died by murder, I would have, felt like anyone else. Yeah. I mean, actually, he was in this national park with adults teaching him, and they knew he was sick, and they got him to the doctor that Friday morning, and he died in his sleep Friday night, but no one checked on him all weekend long because they
Wow.
got busy and they went camping or whatever in the national park. And they call us on Monday and say, and then the coroner says, I wouldn't see Scott. He's not looking good. And so we didn't. And we're faced with all that. And then it's like, what do we do with it? But there's something about the human spirit that often is just able to just keep plugging along and finds those pieces and parts that spirit maybe brings in, not maybe, but spirit brings into us, the people, the book, whatever it may be, that opens up our heart to something new, gives us something new to focus on. Maybe, I knew a friend whose child died by a drunk driver. And oh my gosh, she has done so much to help other people through that cause. And it's magnificent to watch that healing that comes, and then how many people are affected in a really beautiful way by it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have heard it been said in mediumistic circles that, can you imagine on a soul level that we are, we're up in heaven, wherever you want to be, and I say to you on a soul level, well, I want to experience to be murdered. And you say to me, well, I'll do that for you in a loving way. And I will go to prison and experience, because I want to see what it's like to be incarcerated or tortured or murdered in prison, that kind of thing. It is kind of, I mean, it goes way beyond human conception and ideas. But then the premise of it actually being a loving thing just blows your mind. Just the concept of that. But it's an interesting philosophy, or an interesting idea, certainly. So, Sara, it's been absolutely privileged interviewing you today. Can I ask you one question? What is the one thing we're not talking about that we should be?
It's within all of this, it's hard for me to be specific, and you could probably talk to anybody and get a different answer with this. But I think that I would say the spiritual journey and just being open to a greater view of life. But I'm seeing that it's almost happening now in ways. I think we need to just there's so many varieties or so many ways of thinking and looking at. So I would say, I don't have anything really specific. I know that you were going to ask me this question. I would say spiritually, I wish sometimes this was like a bigger venue, that more people were tapping into this. And then I talked to a friend the other day who went on a trip to Peru, and there were people training to be shamans from every part of the world. And so it wasn't just like somebody coming from America. They were from Estonia and they were from Germany. So I think that spirit is opening up our view of this in ways that we will eventually see. And we are, as a medium, as a mom, spiritually working through this. I think that we're starting to expand, because when my journey started, I saw nothing of this.
Yes.
There weren't even any books to really go by, a few. So I see that. Just be open about it. Death has always been quiet, right?
Absolutely.
It's been one of those things people don't want to talk about.
Yeah, it's been a very personal process. People shy away from helping each other rather than reaching out and talking about it. Yeah, but your good work, you've done so much to help people. It's fabulous. So, but before we go, what's next for you though? What plans have you got? I know you've done so much already, but what plans for the future?
I have no idea. And I'm 76 now, which is mind-blowing. And yet I feel like I've been taken every place I needed to go. I never was like that driven. It's like, remember I told you I didn't really want to write the blogs, which was kind of put me on the map in some ways. And so I trust where I'm being taken. And for Kat to have given you my name, and that I had helped her at some point, was huge. It's like, well, that was a surprise. I mean, now I'm going to talk to Paul. So I really trust the journey in ways that I don't know what the future is. I'm trusting it. And it's been interesting, really, really interesting, and so valuable, I feel, to my journey.
Well, you've been an absolute example to everybody, and with your blogs and all the work that you've done with the parent support groups and helping parents heal, you're an absolute example of well, for us all. So we can thank you for that, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. It's been a real privilege.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.